Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing fabulously well. And go and get yourself that fabulous drink, whatever it is that you enjoy drinking, whether it's something effervescent and sparkling or something warm and cozy. Just go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I stare vacantly out of the kitchen window, my mind wandering 1,000 miles away, almost as if my thoughts have been hijacked by the startling news I've just received that has left me feeling more than a little discomposed and unhinged, for I'm not certain how this news could potentially impact our lives. I'm a creature of habit, set in my ways. I don't welcome change very easily, in any shape, way or form, for I am steadfastly consistent in everything I do. I always order the same tenderloin steak at the diner, and I've played golf every Sunday for the last 5 years consistently. It's raining cats and dogs out there. The rain is pouring down in buckets. It's dribbling down our glass pane on the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room area, on the lower elevation of our symmetrical farmhouse, where me and my family have happily resided for the last 12 years. I never bemoaned or regretted moving to the countryside from the city. I've always been a person that cherishes nature, and it's over the weekends I get to appreciate living in the countryside, in such a rural abode, where I can relinquish all the online work that I've been doing during the week, and take a ride on Stardust, my beautiful American quarter horse, down one of those hiking trails, and forget about the encumbrant responsibilities and contentious challenges that held me shackled to the chair in my office, subjugated or held captive, if you like, to the ceaseless piles of uncongenial work I'm expected to do during the week. I only take a trip to the main offices in central Seattle twice a week, so working from home is a huge bonus for me, and in any spare time I get, I thoroughly enjoy spending time with my 2 children, Reuben, who's 15, and Alexa, who's 12. When it rains here in Washington State, which is quite frequent, we're known for having fickle, capricious and vacillating weather that is changeable and unpredictable. You can quite literally have 4 seasons in one day, so you could potentially wear a jacket, a winter coat, a raincoat and a swimming costume in one day. Alexa always says that when it rains, someone out there is very sad. I think she might be right about that. I watch the rain dribbling down the glass pane. It really does reflect the inward turmoil that is jetting around my heart, like a washing machine in full cycle. I wouldn't mind being able to let go and cry sometimes, but my tear ducts are as dry and barren as the Sahara Desert. I wish I could clandestinely cry. It would be a release from the angst I'm feeling that is gathering up in my chest like storm clouds on a tempestuous day. The last time I cried was when my stepbrother Rodney locked me up in a barn for 2 days, when I was about 12 years old. It's been 20 years since I was estranged and alienated from my stepbrother, and now the news that he was found lying deceased in his home has hit me hard like a ton of bricks to the head. The coroner believes he died of a stroke. I've barely mentioned my stepbrother to my wife, as he's always been an ambivalent, pugnacious subject that I rarely wanted to avoid discussing, as the impassioned memories I have of him were not pleasant. My stepbrother was a dark, bellicose character, who was neither kind to man nor beast. I never thought I'd ever have to think about him again, but now he's come back into my life like the proverbial boomerang, in a manner of speaking. I gather my stepbrother has listed me as the next of kin for his 12-year-old daughter, whose mother is also deceased. I'm the only available relative who can take her into my charge, or the girl will be forced to go into foster care. I've agreed that the girl can come and live with us, but I haven't discussed this provocative, problematic issue with my own wife. In truth, I'm not certain how well she's going to take this inopportune, inexpedient news. Neither am I certain what it's going to be like, having a young girl Alexa's age moving into our home. I can only hope and pray she's not a chip off the old block, as that will be inviting grievous trouble into our lives that we can almost certainly well do without. When my wife comes through the kitchen door, she's carrying a large brown paper bag in her hands from the shopping. I can see her long brown hair is wet. She hasn't managed to escape the rain. The rest of the shopping is in the car. I'll bring it in later, she says, placing the brown paper bag onto the kitchen counter. She starts removing the groceries from the bag. A long baguette, a cooked chicken, a bottle of onion marmalade, some pre-cooked potato salad, some Greek salad, a bottle of French dressing, and a large piece of brie cheese. "What's wrong?" she says suddenly. "Your face has gone as white as a sheet." "Oh my God, what are you not telling me? Has something dreadful happened?" I watch my wife's face pale. "It's not my mother. Please don't tell me it's my mother. Has something happened to her? Oh my God, please no," she says, clasping her hand over her mouth. "Calm down, sweetheart. It's nothing like that, I say," taking a big sigh. "It's my stepbrother. He's dead." "You're talking about the stepbrother that was always getting into trouble with the law? The one that locked you up in the barn?" "The very same one. I gather he died of a massive stroke." My wife walks over to me. She cradles me lovingly in her arms. "You poor, poor thing. I know that even though the two of you never got on, and you haven't been in touch for many years, it's certainly not easy to hear that a blood relative has died, regardless of how disconnected you may have been. It always comes as a shock." "Well, he had a 12-year-old daughter, I believe, called Michelle. He listed me as the next of kin. I told the social services that she could come and live with us." "You said what?" said my wife. "But you know nothing about her. Supposing she's a dreadful influence on Alexa. You can't just go and say that a random stranger can just move in with us willy-nilly." "She's not a random stranger. You can't call her that. She is related to me by blood. We will cross that bridge when we come to it. I can't very well just toss the poor girl into the foster care system, can I? That would be a cruel thing to do." Cheryl's account. I waited with bated breath as the taxi drew up outside our home, containing a passenger that I wasn't sure I would particularly like, so I felt a rising sense of trepidation. I knew Michelle had grown up in a less than agreeable environment. I gather her mother had died fortuitously in a car accident when she was only 7 years old. She was raised from thenceforth by her father for the last 5 years of her life, in a small apartment in Houston, by a father who was working as a carpenter, but was always engaged in underhand dealings. What kind of a daughter would my husband's half-brother have raised as a single father? I dreaded to think. I glanced out of the window as I saw a young girl getting out of the truck. I almost felt relieved to see that she didn't have 3 heads and a pair of fangs. She looked as normal as any other 12-year-old girl. The taxi driver pulled a suitcase out of the trunk of the car. That was when I felt tears welling up in the back of my eyes. Poor thing, I thought. Is that all she's got in the entire world? I could feel generous waves of empathetic compassion flooding over me, rather like a tsunami of solicitous commiseration, as I discerned this girl was all alone in the world, like a stray, abandoned, unloved dog on the street corner, who had no safe place to rest his weary head. I could hear the knock at the door. I quickly rushed forward to open it. A sweet-looking young girl was standing in the doorway. She had her pretty, shiny, long black hair swept back in a ponytail. She had translucent porcelain fair skin and very beguiling green eyes. "Do come in," I said. She gave me a warm smile. "I just want to say, Mrs. Burford, that I'm so grateful you're having me to stay. I was really scared that I was going to have to be carted off to a foster home. My father never told me I had an uncle and aunt and cousins, but I'm thankful you've taken me in. I truly appreciate your great kindness." Alexa's account. "You're going to share a bedroom with me," I told Michelle. "Mum says you can have a room of your own later on, when you're much more settled. She thinks that for the moment it'll be good for us to share a bedroom together for a while, so we can get to know each other better. I'm so glad you're here, because although I love my brother very much, he only wants to play boys' games like cowboys and Indians and stuff like that. It's nice to have another girl around the place." I'll be glad of the company, said Michelle. I've always imagined how good it would be to have a sister. Now it seems my wish has come true. I felt thrilled by her comments. She was describing me as a sister. It would be awesome, I thought, if we became close. I'm sorry, I said, about your dad dying. I say this looking awkward, but I know it needs to be said. Otherwise it's like ignoring and disregarding the gargantuan pink elephant in the room. I mean, what do you say to someone in a short space of time who's lost both of their parents? I feel so much empathy for her, for I couldn't envisage what it would feel like to lose both of my parents, as my family is absolutely everything to me. If you must know, I'm very glad he's dead, she tells me. He was a complete loser. I notice that Michelle's jaw tightens. I realise she's not melancholic, desolate, or even heartbroken that her dad has died, which strikes me as lugubriously doleful and very sad. You know, when my mother was alive, she told me what a loser my dad was. I wasn't very happy when she died because I had to move in with my dad. But then I suppose beggars can't be choosers, can they? And anything is better than ending up with social services tossing you from one foster home to another. It's rather like playing Russian roulette, isn't it? You never know what kind of family is going to be taking you on. It's better the devil you know, is it not? I suppose so, I say. If you don't mind me asking, why do you think your dad was such a loser? My dad didn't give a toss about me. He didn't care about anything I did. I suppose the one good thing about him was he gave me money, lots of it, to buy whatever I needed. But otherwise he pretty much ignored me the whole time. He came home every night. He'd get drunk as a skunk. And then in the morning he'd be sober again and go off to work. It was like he pigeonholed his life into separate compartments, if you know what I mean. He wasn't horrible to me, but being ignored makes you feel pretty lonely. Sometimes on a Saturday night he'd come back home from the bar and bring a sozzled woman home with him. And she would be so bladdered, and the whole evening they'd be laughing and getting drunk together. I often went to stay at Lucy's house, she's my best friend, for the whole weekend. And you know what got me every time? My dad never even noticed that I'd been gone. That really hurt me a lot. But after a while I got used to being ignored. That's terrible, I said. My mother would always notice if I went missing, even for an hour. She'd be champing at the bit, she'd be so worried about me. Did your dad ever tell you he loved you? Are you for real? Said Michelle. Of course he never told me he loved me. What a strange question to ask. You are funny. If he ignores me all the time, I think love is pretty far from his mind, don't you? Love is a verb, is it not? It comes with actions, I think. Well, my parents tell me they love me all the time. But then do they really? Do they love you really? Asked Michelle. How do you know they're not making it up? I mean, that's what parents dutifully tell their children, that they love them. But they could be lying, could they not? I don't believe all parents really love their children. In fact, I doubt it a lot. I must confess I did thoroughly enjoy having Michelle staying with me in my bedroom, but there were controversial, ambiguous and contentious things about her that were different to other girls my own age, possibly due to the precarious, phlegmatic way she was raised, or the fact that she'd spent so much time on her own. I think she was suffering from repressed anger, as she had a hard, apathetic, stony-hearted, almost glacial side to her character, which was unemotional, detached and indifferent. I think she had hardwired herself to become ruthlessly impenetrable and rigidly austere, not allowing anything to ever hurt her, so she'd learnt to develop a tough rhino skin. I never saw her get dismayed about anything, nor did she so much as ever cry a stray tear. If we watched a sorrowful movie together that would invariably make me cry incessantly, she would have a disdainful, emotionless face, as if nothing that had transpired during the movie had moved her in the slightest. I noticed when people got murdered or killed on screen, her face would become animated and light up like a Christmas tree. She seemed to delight in all the grueling stuff. The biggest shock and revealing revelation came to me in my biology class, when we were each asked to dissect a live frog. Michelle killed her specimen with an ebullient enthusiasm and a zestful eagerness that was disturbingly unsettling, Even the teacher looked discomposed by how thrilling the killing game was to Michelle. I was very baffled when she jubilantly offered to kill everybody else's frogs. You see, no one wanted to kill their specimen. I love frogs and I didn't want to kill mine, so I clandestinely let it escape out of the back window of the classroom, so I had to share the dead specimen with the girl next to me. I cannot bear killing anything. I also noticed that Michelle had a shrewd maturity about her. She was much more worldly wise about life than the rest of us, but she was very popular and well liked by all the kids. The teachers described her as a model student, and even my parents seemed to warm to her considerably. But she was always very polite. I always felt as if she was winning people over by just acting charming. It was during the summer I saw an iniquitous, malicious side to Michelle that she concealed so superbly from everyone else. I became acquainted with the pernicious side of her personality. I began to realize that she really was a loathsome individual, a victim of her abusive, injurious background. I say abusive, as to grow up without love is almost certainly a form of abuse. It all began during our summer holidays, when both me and Michelle were riding our bicycles down the country lane. The road in question is now lined with asphalt, but back in those days it was a large dust road that you could cycle on for miles, past undulating viridescent fields, meadows filled with black and white cows or frolicking horses, gravel pits, farmhouses, barns, and vast areas of resplendent verdant woodland. It was when we passed old Mrs. Minnie Quinn's cottage that I parked my bicycle against the white wicker fence. It had been ages since I'd last seen Minnie. She'd always been a grandmother-like figure in my life. I often went to speak to her about all kinds of stuff that I would never share with my mother. With her advancing years, she offered such sagacious advice, and she would often tell me wonderful stories about her younger days. She lived on her own in the cottage, but she used to tell me she had a hairy guardian angel watching over her. I thought that was her just being funny. She always felt safe. That's what she told me anyway. And for a 92-year-old woman, she was still able to take care of herself. "Who lives here?" asked Michelle curiously. "Mrs. Quinn," I said. "I call her Minnie. She's such a sweet old lady. She's 92. It'll be great to pop in and say hello." Michelle pouted. "Must we? I haven't got much time for old ladies." "That's because you've never had a grandmother-like figure in your life. Come on, Michelle. She's a lovely old lady. Let's go and say hello. I promise you'll really like her. She's ever so nice." Michelle looked like she was sulking. She didn't look convinced by my assurances, but she didn't argue with me, and promptly parked her bike outside the white wicker fence next to mine. I opened the cute white gate, and we walked down the cobblestone front path towards the dark black front door. I marvelled at the pretty beds filled with perennial flowers intermingled with roses that graced the front yard so vibrantly with colourful splashes of colour. I reached the brass horsehead knocker, rapping it a few times. "I'm coming! I'm coming!" I could hear a distant voice, and then a scuttling sound as Mrs. Quinn opened the door. It creaked open. I hadn't seen her for over 4 months, and in that time she'd aged considerably. But she was as sharp as ever, and her piercing blue eyes smiled warmly at us through the crinkled folds of her papery skin. She was wearing a tweed skirt, a white shirt, and a cameo brooch. "Oh, this is a lovely surprise, Alexa. Do please come in. Who is this lovely friend of yours?" "This is my half-cousin Michelle. She's living with us now. Both her parents are actually dead." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, dear," said Mrs. Quinn. "Why don't you come in, have some homemade lemonade and some chocolate chip cookies, unless, of course, you would prefer tea?" "Lemonade would be great," I said. "You know me, Minnie. I'll never say no to your chocolate chip cookies. They're the best in the world." "They are good," said Minnie. "I got the recipe from Martha Stewart a long time ago. I've never looked back, you know. Everyone loves those cookies." "She makes them for Christmas presents, don't you, Minnie?" "That's right, dear, I do. But this year the vicar's wife told me not to make any for her husband. She says he's gone up 3 pant sizes in 1 year. She thinks he's always coming here to eat my chocolate chip cookies," she chuckled. "And is the vicar coming around to eat your chocolate chip cookies, Minnie?" I asked, my eyes twinkling mischievously. "Yes, dear, he most certainly does come round rather regularly, every time his wife puts him on a diet." "Can't say I blame him, Minnie," I teased. "Your chocolate chip cookies, they're the best." We followed Mrs. Quinn into the kitchen. Her arthritic mottled hands struggled to pour the lemonade into large glass tumblers, and of course to put the cookies from the tin onto a plate. "Minnie, let me do that for you." "Oh, will you, dear? I'm much obliged. My arthritis is getting worse and worse these days." Minnie led us into the living room. We drank lemonade and ate our cookies. I could see Mrs. Quinn was grateful for the company. We chatted away for a long while about anything and nothing. I feel irritated with Michelle. She's rolling her eyes, yawning rudely, almost as if everything this effervescent, dynamic old woman is saying is boring, when nothing could be further from the truth. "I hope I'm like you when I'm your age, Mrs. Quinn. You're so active. I can't believe you're 92. "Well, it gets harder for me every year, dear. These days my bones are rattling. But I'm so happy living here in this cottage. I wouldn't have it any other way, you know." Mrs. Quinn collects our glasses, and I tell her to sit down. "You sit down, Mrs. Quinn. I'll take the tray back to the kitchen for you, and I'll wash up the dishes." I amble off to the kitchen and begin to wash up the glasses and plates. "That's very good of you, dear. I'll show Michelle my china collection." I placed the glasses and plates in the soapy suds, and I dried them with a tea cloth and placed them neatly in the cupboard. I'm certain I hear a loud, inauspicious thud, a crashing sound, but I don't hear any raised, upset voices, so I automatically assume that Mrs. Quinn was showing Michelle one of her china figurines, and possibly just smashed it accidentally due to her arthritis. I continue to put away the clean plates and glasses. "All done, Mrs. Quinn, you'll be glad to know," I say, walking back into the living room. But I see Mrs. Quinn. She's lying on the floor. There's blood running down her skull. She's lying there motionless, and when I reach down to examine her pulse, I realise she's dead. Her eyes are glazed over like a dead fish. "What have you done? You hurt my friend! What have you done?" "Oh, she's just a stupid old lady," says Michelle. "Get over yourself, Alexa." "What did you do? You killed my friend!" Tears are pouring down my face. Then I hear a crashing sound at the window. I look up to see an obscure hazy figure watching us. He's witnessed everything that has transpired through the living room window. This massive human-like face is staring at us judiciously through its deep-set treacle-coloured eyes, smudging its flat nose against the glass pane. It appears to be trying to look inside the living room. I can see by the pyramid-shaped head and the leathery grey skin on the face that this creature is definitely a Bigfoot. This intimidating, lofty, majestic creature looks terrifying in every way. Michelle takes one look at the creature and screams, "Run! Run!" I don't need much encouraging. My heart is pounding violently in my chest. My blood is coursing through my veins as I dash through the front door, down the stone path, out the white wicker gate, as fast as I can. But I briefly look up. I can see this huge Bigfoot literally taking up Mrs. Quinn's entire living room because he's so large. He's looking down in horror at her motionless body. He lets out a discomposing roar that reverberates through my entire body, making me shudder all over. He sounds like he's distressed and aggrieved by her death, almost as if he's personally known her in life. I can hear the sorrowful notes in his cry. I quickly retrieve my bicycle from the side of the white wicker fence and scramble onto the seat, pressing my feet down on the pedals and riding quickly down the dust road as fast as I possibly can, with Michelle cycling behind me. I glance back to see the Bigfoot standing in the middle of the road, watching us cycling away. He doesn't even try to chase after us. When me and Michelle arrive back at the home, truly all words are confiscated from me by the level of shock that I'm experiencing. I just cannot believe what has transpired. Not only have I just seen a Bigfoot, but my profane half-cousin has sacrilegiously, willfully killed my very good old friend. Michelle looks at me with a black-hearted darkness in her eyes that frightens me. You don't tell anyone what happened. You hear me? Or you're dead. She makes the sign of slitting my throat. I realise that Michelle is clearly not right in the head, and that coming from such a broken home has given her a narcissistic type of personality. But her threats frighten me, for I realise that she is literally capable of anything. Why, I ask her, why did you harm a sweet little old lady? It's called being merciful, says Michelle. That's why people euthanize pets when they get old. I was sparing her all the anguish of getting older. She's 92, for goodness sake. She's had a good innings. But she was perfectly happy with her life until you fortuitously brought it to an end. She needed to go. It was her time. But if you breathe a word about this to your parents, you're dead. I think that Bigfoot saw everything you did. I think he knows you killed her. I think that Bigfoot must have known Mrs. Quinn. He seemed so grievously sad that she was dead. Boo-hoo! For the Bigfoot. I'm so sad for him. A great big hairy monstrous beast. Until now, I didn't even think those things were real. But what can he do? Nothing. Besides, I doubt those things are very intelligent. Maybe the silly old bat gave him chocolate chip cookies, lemonade to drink, and he's all upset because he ain't going to be getting any more. I sensed he was clearly upset by what you did. I thought he was going to attack us. So did I, admitted Michelle. I've never been so scared in all my life. But he didn't attack us, did he? So everything is hunky-dory. As long as you don't breathe a word, because if I go down, I'm taking you down with me. I'll tell everyone you wanted to harm her. And it wasn't me, it was you who did it. But everyone knows I love Minnie, that I'd never ever harm her. I don't even know how you killed her. I hit her over the head with the fire poker. Her eyes rolled in the back of her head, she fell over backwards and was gone like that. She didn't even feel a thing. It was like swatting a fly. You really are evil, Michelle. You murdered poor Mrs. Quinn. How can you talk about her with such disregard? One day you'll be an old lady. How would you like it if someone swatted you like that? I will not deny the fact that I was now terrified of Michelle. But I knew if I breathed a word about what had happened to poor Minnie, that Michelle would not hesitate to bring me down with her. I so wanted to run to my mother and to tell her everything, but I was too afraid of the repercussions and also concerned that some locals may have seen our bicycles outside Minnie's cottage and potentially we could be taken in for questioning by the police. It was at dinner the following evening, when my mother was piling mashed potatoes and sausages on our plates, that she said, "I've got some very sad news to have to tell you all. I know you're going to be particularly upset, Alexa, as you were desperately fond of Minnie. But I'm afraid she was found dead in her cottage this morning by the postman, who noticed the front door half open. He grew very concerned. He found her lying dead in the living room. He was very distressed." I tried to act surprised. "Oh, that's terrible, Mum. What happened?" "Well, the police are investigating the crime. The coroner says she was hit over the head with a sharp instrument, so she didn't die of natural causes. It seems that she was murdered." "Oh, my God," said Michelle. "Who would want to hurt the poor frail old woman? I met her once. She was so nice. We really liked her, didn't we, Alexa?" I couldn't believe that my half-cousin, responsible for Minnie's death, was acting like she actually cared about the woman. "I know, it is quite frightful to even contemplate," said my mother. "It is rather bizarre, to say the least. It seems that the perpetrator was remorseful about what he or she had done, as Minnie's body was found lying on heaps and heaps of straw in the middle of the living room, while many of the flowers from her yard were found prettily arranged around her body. So the police believe it was someone who she knew personally that perpetrated the crime. And then in a moment of remorse, they arranged her body in an extraordinary way. They even put the flowers in her hair. I gather her daughter says the ruby ring on her hand has been stolen, along with a string of pearls she always wears. I gather her daughter told the police that Mrs. Quinn had recently been diagnosed with breast cancer and was given less than a year to live." So poor Minnie was killed for a string of pearls and a ruby ring, my father says. And then they arrange her body on barrels of straw and decorate her body with flowers. I will admit that is exceedingly bizarre. So the perpetrator suddenly feels a wee bit remorseful. What a dreadful thing to do to a poor old lady. It would seem so, said my mother. It is desperately sad. From what I gather, there's crime scene tape all over the cottage, but the postman thinks the police aren't going to find much DNA. There's mud trailed all over the carpet in the living room. I think with bringing all those flowers and straw into the house, it really got to be quite a mess. Who goes and kills a lovely old lady like that? They have to be duplicitously evil. It would seem that after poor Mrs. Quinn's death, the police investigation drew to a close. I must admit I was hugely relieved about it. I knew if me and Michelle were brought in for questioning, if anyone had seen us leaving the premises, Michelle wouldn't hesitate to pin all the blame on me. She was guilefully duplicitous like that, and very persuasive, so I knew I needed to keep my eyes on her. I kept up the pretense of being good friends with her, as I was desperately afraid if I did not, me or a member of the family could be seriously hurt. One day, me, Michelle and my brother went for a hike in the woodgrove. The hiking trail was accessed close to old Mrs. Quinn's cottage that had been recently sold and purchased by another old lady, who chose to put up a security system inside her cottage based on what had happened to Minnie. I understand she told my mother, "You can never be sure these days what kind of wackos are out there." And my mother had wholeheartedly agreed, being blindly oblivious that the weirdo in question was actually living under our own roof. I do remember it was a beautiful summer's day. It was the school holidays for us, a whole year after Mrs. Quinn's tragic demise. Every time I mentioned the subject to Michelle, she would scoff and say that she had done the old woman a favour, as the old lady was going to die of cancer anyway, and she had put her out of her misery. Do you know how much suffering people go through when they have cancer? They have to take morphine and all kinds of pain meds. I've eliminated all that for her, have I not? I told you it was a mercy killing. You didn't know she had cancer when you killed her, I reminded her. There was nothing merciful about what you did. If you've forgotten you killed her in cold blood, you're not God. You don't decide who lives or dies. Michelle scoffed. Don't dredge all this up again, Alexa. It's getting terribly boring. We were riding our bicycles down the long, rugged country lane. My brother suggested we took a walk down the old abandoned woodland trail that was no longer accessed by the locals, based on the fact that a better trail had been recently prepared. This was the old trail people frequented in the 1950s, he told us. I've never been this way before, but I think it should be great fun. The three of us were hesitant, but our naturally adventurous, inquisitive natures punctured our reluctance, rather like a beach ball that was soon deflated by our zestful enthusiasm. It was an easily accessible trail, which was rather bewildering, given it was no longer actively in use. How could this be? Would you not expect it to be overgrown? On the contrary, it looked as though someone had been fastidiously maintaining the trails over many years, as there was no estranged saplings ensnared under a large tree, nor were there rambunctious overgrown brambles or shrubbery, greedily spreading out their leafy abundance to run wildly over the woodgrove like out-of-control weeds. It would seem everything was in perfect sequence and coordination, like the musical notes in a hymn. All the tall, imposing trees that peppered this woodgrove were spectacularly spaced out, while the fauna and flora dappled the forest floor with a viridescent splendour that coordinated seamlessly, as if everything had been fastidiously mapped out with a perfect precision, as it all had its place. There was no doubt in my mind that this forest was more transfixing than the normal woodland trails we regularly frequented. It was like we had stumbled on a secret magical place, as the entrance to this woodland sanctuary was so overgrown. It gave you the false, misleading impression that if you ventured any deeper into this dense savane, you would need a machete to break your way through the shrubbery. But this was not the case. So maybe the authorities had been keeping it ship-shape for many years, and were blindly oblivious or unaware that it was no longer in use. A gentle breeze began to filter through the woods, charging it with a revitalizing, cool, energizing air, while the tall, imposing ponderosa pines and Douglas firs jiggled their needled boughs, swaying gently in the breeze, like elegant ladies waving their hands. The vast canopy above our heads permitted a select measure of light to enter this enticing sylvan, sprinkling it with a refined gossamer light. We could hear the vibrant orchestra of the birds, filling the forest with warbles, tweets and trills. We surprised a plethora of woodland animals, most especially deer and rabbits, that seemed startled by our appearance, which certainly affirmed to me that this pathway was barely ever accessed by any of the locals. In a trice, the forest changed. The transformation was dramatic, instantaneous. It was as if in a second every bird had ceased to sing, almost as if the conductor of this illustrious feathery orchestra had commanded silence. Everything became ominously quiet. It was an inauspicious, portentous silence, steeped with a menacing impression that veiled the forest in an oppressive, gloomy, heavy carpet of foreboding that was so tangible you could almost feel it. The temperature in the forest plummeted. It shifted from being pleasantly warm to really rather chilly. If that wasn't bad enough, we got the terrible sense that we weren't alone, that invisible eyes were searing into our flesh like burning hot coals. "Something is looking at us. I can feel eyes on us," I insisted. "Oh, don't be such a silly big baby, Alexa. Nothing is watching us. Get a grip, girl." "I feel it too," said my brother. "Alexa is not imagining things. Something is definitely watching us." "Not you too," said Michelle. "The problem is the two of you have overactive imaginations. If anything is looking at us, it's possibly a deer hiding behind a bush." I knew there was no point in arguing with Michelle, so we trudged forward into the forest. But as we moved forwards, we could hear something was following us. You could hear that whoever or whatever it was had a very heavy footfall. It was now Michelle's turn to look anxious. "I think I hear something. Something's following us with big feet." Her face paled. "I think we should go back. Something feels off." We turned around and glimpsed this dark, shadowy being moving through the trees. We could see glimpses of black through the branches, and then we heard a grunting sound. "What the hell is that?" said my brother, who was beginning to freak out. His voice sounded like it was quivering with anxiety. "I think it might be a Bigfoot," I said. "Me and Michelle, we've seen one before." Before my brother could even react, the Bigfoot emerged through the trees, and the only way I can describe him to you was that I felt we were in the presence of something very majestic. The creature was all male, about 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, covered in long, dark, black flowing hair, with a human-like face, and the kindest deep-set eyes that I've ever seen. I could see my brother was trembling. He was terrified by the intimidating size and formidable, daunting presence of this creature, while Michelle was shaking like a leaf. But for some reason, I remained stoically calm, as I sensed this intelligent creature meant us no harm. The creature was standing yards away from us. His eyes darted from me to my brother, and then to Michelle. But when he saw Michelle, he pointed at her, pulled back his lips, and growled. I knew at once that this was the Bigfoot we had witnessed that day in Millie's house, and he had beheld what had happened that day. He knew Michelle was responsible for murdering Millie. He was pointing his hands at Michelle. I don't know if he was speaking to her in her mind, because Michelle was saying, "I didn't mean to. It was just an accident." She looked petrified, her eyes growing as round as saucers. The Bigfoot glided towards her. He lashed Michelle across the head with his hand. In a trice she fell backwards on the forest floor. I realized at once she was dead. It was almost as if the Bigfoot had hit her in precisely the same spot as she had hit Millie. I'm not sure why me and my brother did not run away, but the Bigfoot looked up at us with bright, warm eyes, nodded at us, and then glided away. "Did you see that?" said my brother. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked him. "I think the Bigfoot spoke to me in my head. He said, 'Now justice has been executed.'" "What's that supposed to mean?" My brother ran over to Michelle and looked up at me in horror, telling me what I already knew. "Michelle is dead! Oh my God! The Bigfoot killed her! Why would he do such a dreadful thing? He didn't seem like a mean fellow to me. It doesn't make any sense. He didn't even touch us. Why did he single her out like that?" "Maybe he saw something in her that was dark," I suggested. "Sis," said my brother, "you do realise we cannot tell anyone about the Bigfoot we've seen. Do you understand that? It's very important. If we mention the creature to anyone, we will be the laughing stock of everyone in town. No one will believe us." "Well, what about Michelle? How will we explain her death?" I asked him. "We will say we were walking ahead of her on the woodland trail. We heard a thump and turned around to find her dead." To cut a long story short, I felt a monumental relief that Michelle was no longer living with us. It was hard to grieve her loss after I'd seen what she had done to Minnie. I knew she wasn't a good person. I lived my life in fear and trepidation, and now she was gone. The solace and succour I felt was immense. I was able to share my story with my parents. We realised that Michelle was so messed up, a victim of her tempestuous childhood. She was filled with such a repugnant, abhorrent anger that she could easily express violently. My mother believes that later on in life she could have potentially done greater harm. I believe the Bigfoot recognised Michelle as the girl who'd killed Millie. Perhaps he was determined to execute justice on Minnie's behalf. But perhaps he also saw within her the potential for executing even greater obnoxious, invidious evil. Perhaps he was determined to destroy the objectionable blackness he saw in her heart. I really believe he had a prodigious, remarkable friendship with the old woman. She had always told me she had a guardian angel watching over her, and a hairy one at that. Could it be that she was referring to her Bigfoot friend? I think that more than likely. I know it was this wondrous, bodacious and commanding Bigfoot whom had arranged Millie's deceased body on a bed of straw, and decorated her so prettily with flowers from her yard. It was interesting that the Bigfoot had hit Michelle on exactly the same area on her head that she had hit Millie, and I believe that was intentional. Some people would describe that as karma, and I think they may be right about that. I bagged up Michelle's clothes to send to the thrift store. Then I found the ruby ring and pearls in her wardrobe that she had stolen from Minnie, so I promptly posted them to Minnie's daughter, anonymously, and after that my family were once again united in love. And with Michelle out of the way, we thrived and blossomed, and life thankfully returned to normal. The world is an infinitely nicer place when evil is destroyed. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.